everybody. My name is Dylan, and my pronouns are he, she, and I'm the learning experience designer at Equality Leaders. And I wanted to thank you all for joining us today here at our second LGBTQ plus Voices storytelling event, proudly powered by Jacobs. Throughout Pride Month this June, the teams at both Equality Leaders and Jacobs continue to bring an intersectional perspective to center LGBTQ plus voices. We've sought to amplify the voices of our storytellers to not only acknowledge that Pride Month is rooted in protest, but also to celebrate queer lives as abundant, filled with love, light, and joy. But importantly, our storytellers are also allies, activists, agitators, accomplices, and change makers in their own right, intent on speaking their truths to power. And today's storyteller is doing exactly that. It's my absolute honor to be in conversation with trans boxer, speaker, and activist Jill LaFleur.
Hello, hello
Hi,
everyone. Hey Dylan.
Jill.
I
Hi,
just
hi,
gotta say,
hi.
I love your t-shirt. I went super boring today. I'm feeling I should have picked something cooler. You're one-upping me there.
Bless you. Thank you so much. Well, we've kind of got a whole yin and yang thing going on here, so I think it's perfectly balanced. Thank
Perfect.
you. Thank you so much for being here, Jill. So, for those of you who are yet to meet Jill today will be sharing with us his personal journey as well as explore topics in conversation with me, such as LGBTQ plus visibility in sport, but more specifically, trans male visibility. In fact, a recent report by Mermaids reveals that taking part in sport for trans, non binary, or gender diverse people is not always so straightforward. Barriers such as gendered clothing, single sex changing rooms, and gendered teams can exclude those who are either non binary or can even trigger gender dysphoria. So, these are just some of the topics that Jill and I will be exploring. So, Jill, again, thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time to share your journey. I guess I'd like to start off by really holding space for you to introduce yourself, of course, and share with us those chapters of your journey that are particularly pivotal or meaningful to you. I hand over the mic and the floor to you.
Cheers, Dylan. Thank you. And thank you for having me there. I'm excited. Um, so you've said the kind of boring bits. My name's Joel, pronounce he, him. I'm a trans guy, I'm a boxer. I guess it's always kind of a challenge to try and condense your life in a few bullet points. And I haven't even been alive that long, but I'll try. So if we go back a number of years, I was brought up in Normandy, in the French countryside. So if you all don't know, Normandy is basically like the French equivalent of Devon. I was a very active kid. At some point in my childhood, I was like playing full sports competitively and training in a couple of others, which makes it interesting that my ADHD spent undiagnosed for so long. I was also a huge nerd, spent a lot of time gaming online. Um, and when all through growing up, I was what you'd call a tomboy. When I got this story that my mum recalled way later when I came out to her. So she told me that when I was 3 years old, as she was getting me dressed for kindergarten, she wanted to put me in a dress, and I told her, like, stop putting me in girls' clothes. Like, I want to wear boys' clothes. And my mum was like, all right, and it kind of that was kind of the end of it. And to be fair, at the time, I think my mom was kind of just happy to be able to reuse my older brother's clothes on me. But it kind of worked out in my favor. And that was pretty much the extent of how gendered expectations worked in my family and all through my early years. I was never prevented from doing like any quote unquote masculine hobbies I wanted. So I was doing drums, I was playing rugby, I was doing skateboarding. Um, And so that was a yeah pretty happy childhood basically, which kind of leads us into the what I'll call the first gender crisis. When I was, I guess, about 13, I wrote a letter to my mum, telling her, "Oh, I hate being a girl. I wish I were born a boy." And yeah, to their credit, my parents did take me seriously, and took me to a therapist. But the therapist never mentioned to me or to them that it might have been because I could have been trans, and so I kind of just fizzled out. Because I was a rational kid. Like if there wasn't any way to make it feel better, then there was no point being upset about it. So I kind of, put that in the back of my mind and just carried on. So yeah, teenage kind of years roll around. I started being into boys. Boys weren't into me because I looked like a butch lesbian, which is fair, to be honest. Uh, until I met my partner in high school, which wasn't even that long, but like teenage years feel really, really long when you're living them. Um, I just, yeah, gender wasn't much of a concern. I was still like uncomfortable with some gendered expectations, particularly because I ended up being like a woman in engineering, so I was very much in a like very small minority. But I kind of chalk that up to being uncomfortable with sexism and misogyny in general. Still didn't cross my mind that I could have been trans. So I got into uni, uh, very high pressure. So yeah, didn't have much time to think about my gender really. And I remember like just a tiny little episode from the first year of uni. So I was really stressed. The stress was really getting to me. So I went to see the school's therapist, and they asked me, "Oh, have you ever seen a therapist before?" And I told them, "Oh yeah, for like gendered issues when I was 13, but it's all good now." Little did I know. Um, so uni rolls around, like I get into the penultimate year of my master's degree, and I decide to do another master's in London, which is when the second gender crisis happens, second and final, hopefully. So at the time, I was 21. I was very much into skateboarding. I was a bit of a loner. I was mostly skating on my own because I didn't really know anyone who skated. But I was like, okay, it's London. There's a million skate parks there. I'm gonna try and, make skateboard friends. So I roll up to my local skate park, and it was so full of guys on BMXs. I almost instantly turned around and just went back home and said, "No, it's all right. I'll just skate on my own." But I spotted two people at the back, two like androgynous looking people, and I was like, "This is my people." So I just rolled there, introduced myself, and they introduced me to this queer skate crew, this queer and female skate crew called Sibling, and I basically spent the whole year skateboarding with them. And this is where I met my first trans and trans masculine in particular friends, because growing up, I knew of trans people like in the media, or probably horrible depictions actually, and I knew that theoretically it was possible to go the other way. I just never ever seen an example, so it just wasn't a real possibility for me until I met these people in Sibling, and the cogs started turning, and before the end of the school year, I came out as trans. Um, and there's this kind of idea, and it's pretty much reinforced by like coming out stories in media and stuff, that coming out is kind of the end of the story, and then everything's good, or everything's horrible depending on the kind of film you're watching. But for me, it was very very much the beginning, because well, for a start, it took me about a year to kind of understand which flavor of trans I was, because I came out as non-binary initially. It took me about a year to land on trans man, which I still identify as. I'm still kind of finding my way in the sporting community that I've been a part of my whole life. I've been doing competitive sports my whole life. I've been doing combat sports for over a decade, so like karate, Muay Thai, now boxing, and I'm like, okay, I'm a trans guy now. Where does that leave me? And
Mm.
also, finding my place within the queer community. So it's been 4 years and three boxing fights since I came out, and I'm still kind of figuring it out.
Yeah. Thank you you for sharing that. And there's so much for us to unpack. And of course, little less than an hour doesn't give us nearly enough time. But thank you for sharing that. And it's interesting because I think being LGBTQ plus myself, some of those parts of your story certainly resonate with me, especially when it comes to having an understanding or being introduced to that language, right, which gives you the tools to kind of better express yourself or better understand yourself. So that deep self-reflection really, really is needed, and it's continuously evolving, isn't it? As we start opening up conversations like we are having here today, right? As soon as you start having a conversation with someone who is from, a different part of the incredibly diverse and varied LGBTQ plus community, it just kind of gives you that little bit of perspective, which I always think is important.
Well, yeah, because it might lead you to realize things about you, or it might
Yeah,
just lead you to just be a better ally and just a better person in general.
absolutely. And I think, that's the value in cultivating those connections, right? That connection from human to human. It's so, it just plays such an important part, or it should at least play a very important part in all of our lives. But we'll come back to connection and belonging later on in the session. I know you and I have had some discussions about that before. If I could just kind of maybe rewind and go a little bit back to your days, growing up in rural France. I guess my question then is, what was that like for you, and how did it feel knowing that deep down you were somehow different to the other kids?
Um, I think like one word that kind of described my childhood, at least until puberty, which unfortunately started kind of early for me, but would be carefree. Like it was a lot of like playing with the boys in the neighborhood, outside, just like roughhousing, skateboarding. My dad used to make us these like swords out of wood, and we'd like literally bash each other with them. Um, I was yeah, I mentioned I was nerdy. I also spent a lot of time like gaming online. Always had male avatars and male name, and kind of let everyone assume I was a guy. It's funny looking back, all these signs that make it really obvious that you're trans, but you kind of didn't know at the time. Um, but yeah, as a kid, I was honestly never really confronted to my own gender because I mean, I dressed like a boy, and when you're 6, 7, 8, 9, if you dress like a boy, people just assume you're a boy. And I would correct them most of the time, or my parents would, but I just didn't care, and I didn't have gendered expectations forced on me. So I honestly didn't feel really different until I guess puberty kind of rolled around. And I do remember that feeling um, confusing, but also like kind of unfair because I was like, why do I get to get the like shitty period bit and the boys just kind of carry on, doing whatever. And I know around that time I was because the only language I had for myself was tomboy, which in
Mm,
French translates to mist boy, which is I think sounds even worse. So I was googling that. I was like, okay, all right, let's try and find out uh, what I am. And I remember finding this Skyblog back in the day about tomboys, and
mm,
the person on there was like, oh, like most tomboys are generally lesbians. And I remember being outraged because I was like, no, I know I like boys. I'm not a lesbian. This doesn't work. Like, what is this?
yeah.
And yeah, as I said, I knew of trans women, but didn't know of trans men. I kind of never thought it could apply to me. I didn't
Mm,
have this innate sense of, oh, I'm a boy. Like I was too rational for that. I was like, well, clearly not. um, so yeah, that was mostly it.
yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think there's the research shows that up until the age of around 10, we're not forced or put into those cages where we have to, where there's the expectation, right, that we behave in a certain way. These are the people you should be friends with. These are the people you should love. This is the way you should behave. This is the way you should dress, right? So up until around 10 years of age, we really don't necessarily have a sense of those gender divisions, that binary understanding of gender. And in many ways, you know, um, we get away with it, right? There is the freedom to kind of be more tomboyish or perhaps more effeminate because it's just considered to be childish playfulness in many ways. But as soon as you start hitting 10 years of age and older, and like you say, puberty, then all of a sudden this pressure comes in, not necessarily only from parents, but peers, other kids, teachers, the rest of community and society, and that often can create a great deal of disconnect for many of us.
Yeah, and yeah, it's true because like up until a certain point, I was like, I'm just doing the things I want. I didn't say, oh, well, I did tell my mum I wanted boys' clothes because it's the only way I knew how to describe trousers and t-shirts, but
Mm,
it's it was, oh, I'm doing this because I want to, not because it's what the boys are doing. I'm playing drums and rugby and skateboarding because I want to, but I was also playing the piano and drawing,
mm,
and not all of my hobbies were like super 100% little boy hobbies,
yeah,
right? It's just what I wanted and what my friends were doing and what was cool at the time.
yeah,
And it is, around like 10-ish
mm,
that kind of, yeah. I mean, I was still doing what I wanted because I'm like that, but it wasn't exactly seen the same way.
yeah, yeah, sure. So, yeah, no, many within the LGBTQ plus community consider coming out almost as a rite of passage, right? Something that needs to be done to live loudly, proudly, and in many ways just be welcomed by or into the community with open arms. But I think it's also important that we recognize that this narrative can be harmful and also exclusionary because there are those siblings of ours who choose to remain in the closet to stay safe, and they're just as valid, right? So, could you maybe share with us a little bit more about your experience of coming out and what it's meant to you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, I'm gonna say that mostly for people watching because you're definitely aware of that. But coming out is not a one-time experience, unfortunately. It kind of happens throughout your life with different groups of people, and the initial one might is generally the one that people refer to as the coming out, but it doesn't stop there. And I think for trans people in particular, there's kind of, I like to think that there's two closets. There's the one that you're in before you come out to anyone, and there's the
Mm,
one that you're in once and if you start passing as your actual gender. Um, and I guess for me, like coming out of the first closet was very easy, and I was incredibly lucky for that. Um, because, well, basically, once I figured out I was trans, I stayed in the closet for maybe 1 month, and then immediately came out because I just couldn't keep that to myself. It was too big. And at the time I was mostly worried about my partner's reaction because we'd been together since high school. It had been over 7 years at this point, and I knew he identified as a heterosexual man. So I was like, well, there's a very good chance that it's not going to work out. Um, I had primed him before coming out, like a couple of months before. I had told him like that I was questioning my gender. I wasn't quite sure where I stood, and so when I did eventually come out as non-binary at the time, it didn't come as a surprise. What I
mm,
didn't know though, and that's like ally tip number one, is that once I told him I was questioning actually what he did on his own without telling me, he went online, looked up like all the definitions, like, oh, what does trans mean? What does non-binary mean? What would that change? He went onto a community, I think on Reddit, of like partners of people who are trans to try and see how it could have worked out for other people, what he had to watch out for. Um, and so yeah, once I came out, it went very smoothly. He hasn't misgendered me once. And I mean, 4 years later, we're still together, so it kind of did work out. And he does now identify as bisexual. Um, I think my family, I did care about obviously because I'm quite close with them, but it wasn't as much of a oh my God, my life is ruined if they if they don't accept it, because I was
Mm.
already living far from home. Like I was at uni, it wasn't it wasn't a big deal. My older brother, I think I just sent him a text and he said like thumbs up or something like, which sounds kind of callous, but I actually he was very supportive. He just didn't want to make a big deal out of it.
Mm.
And my parents and my younger brother, I told them as they came to London for my graduation. We were like sitting in this coffee shop eating cheesecake, and I just kind of went quiet and started crying. And Mama was like, "Oh my God, what's happening?" And I just couldn't tell her, and she was like, "Oh, do you have like cancer or something?" I was like, "No, it's nothing bad. It's just important." And I just end up telling them, and it went like well, and same with the rest of my family and my friends. And I realized how incredibly fortunate I was.
Mm.
Um, I guess in a sense they kind of expected it. Like they also didn't have the language. They didn't know, but they knew me, dressed in boys' clothes and doing all the things that boys were doing and studying engineering and things for as long as they knew me. So it wasn't a surprise. They were like, "Oh, okay, this is what it means." Um, I actually find that the second closet, so the one that I'm in now, for most people, I find that a lot trickier to come out of. Um, it's always kind of it's always kind of gone kind of awkwardly when I have, and mostly with cishet people, but not only. You think queer people would be slightly more like primed to that stuff, but they even like yeah, cisgender queer people don't really. No one expects a trans guy, basically. So when you actually refer to something in your past as like, "Oh, I used to play on the girls' rugby team in uni," they're like, "Wait a minute, like, what does that
Mm.
mean?" Or if I tell them, "Oh, my first fight was against a girl," they're like, you know. So yeah, that's always kind of awkward. I haven't mastered the perfect way to come out as trans. Coming out as gay is a lot easier for some reason. I just mention my partner and use he, him pronouns and then sorted.
Mm.
Maybe I should find a way a bit more like casual for the trans thing because it hasn't worked out too well so
Yeah.
far.
Yeah. And it really does vary from day to day, from the situation or context that you find yourself in. I'm sure, and it is it's tough to navigate that in a way that's both safe and comfortable for you, right? Firstly, um, and secondly, something that, in a way, that kind of doesn't necessarily become a point of conflict or tension, or doesn't derail the conversation or the engagement or interaction between you
Yeah,
and
or just the way they see you,
yeah.
because once you come out to some people, they just can't see you
Mm.
as what you are now.
Yeah.
They just instantly revert back to who you used to be, even if they didn't know you then. They're just like,
Mm.
oh my God, it's a girl that became a boy. It's not like this guy I've been friends with for X
Mm.
amount of time. And I guess that's kind of why I like to get it out of the way quite early on, because if that's going to change something, then I'd rather not waste time, being really good friends with you if that's going to be a deal breaker. So
Of
I
course.
mean, I guess I feel safe enough to do that because it's always gone well in my, private life with my family and friends. I never had issues. So I kind of don't feel that, I don't feel like I'm going to be like attacked or anything.
Mm.
But yeah, and also just I like being open because I want to be able to talk about, well, yeah, when I was on the girls' rugby team, and I don't want to say, oh, when I was on the rugby team, and then kind of skirt around any pronouns. And I'm like, oh, come on, like
Yeah.
it's too much effort. I don't want that. Just like when I'm gonna tell you about my partner, I'm gonna use him, and I'm gonna tell you what we did this weekend. Like I, sh- I don't want to avoid it. I don't want to make a big deal out of it, and I don't want to try and like, oh, remember, oh, this person knows, this person doesn't know, so I gotta watch out when they interact together. I gotta be stressed that, oh, he's gonna say something that is gonna,
Mm.
let the other know or something.
Mm.
I don't have this mental capacity,
Sure.
so I just avoid it entirely by just trying to be out to everyone.
Yeah. So you touched there, a lot on language, and you having to learn the language yourself, which has given you the tools almost to kind of better understand yourself. But you also touched on, the language that your family, your friends, your loved ones um, were lacking. So how have you gone about doing that? Do you hold space for each other as a family where you can have those, open, curious conversations? Or have you just kind of said, there's a ton of resources, go and read and self-educate yourselves?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I wouldn't say we're like, oh, we have like monthly family meetings or whatever where we kind of like talk through issues or whatever. We're not that evolved. Um, but no, but when I came out, um I mostly turned it in the ways that they would have to like adapt to who I already was, as opposed to like me changing into this person that who is someone else. I'm like, no, I'm literally nothing has changed from 5 minutes ago to now. I'm the same person. So I told them, well, I like if you, I would prefer you, and I want you to refer to me by masculine pronouns and use, well, because French is very gendered language, so you like every adjective, every noun that you use to refer to someone is gendered. So I told them like, please use the masculine versions of those for me. I didn't change my name, which I guess kind of was easy for them because the way you pronounce it in French is the same as a male name. So Gilles, if you spell it the male way, would be Gilles. So that didn't change anything. I didn't want to change my name to that version. I was like, no, that's fine. Too much paperwork. I'm just gonna keep that. It works. It's fine. And I kind of use so I don't think I send them any resources, but my mom, bless her, she also went online and kind of looked up like a few things, and we watched together this documentary series on a French trans guy. He's the only kind of well-known French trans guy. So he made like this documentary series about the first year of his transition, and that was kind of like that came out basically when I came out, so it was kind of good to like watch that together. And so my mom would kind of see, oh, what does that involve? Like, oh, what's like top surgery like? What's hormones like? What's changing everything like? And what's it like for the person going through it? It's not just them having to adapt. Also, my life is changing somewhat. Even if I'm not changing, I still got to take steps to make sure that everyone else refers to me correctly. Um, so there was all of that. I did use a little training method, I would say, for my friends and family to kind of get them to use the correct pronouns. My friends got me for my birthday like buzzers that make really loud sounds, and we kind of scattered them. So I had some in my flat share, I had some at home, and we turned it into a game that someone misgendered me on accident. It was never on purpose. Like the person who like it was a game to see who would rush to the buzzer the quickest, and it kind of like made them learn through competition and shame. Because if you're the one who fucked it up, then you're the one who's getting buzzed.
Yeah.
And that worked. Actually, that worked really well. Like after 2 3 weeks of doing that, no one was messing up anymore. So
I
yeah,
love that.
pro
It's
tip.
kind of the X factor of pronouns.
Kind of, yeah. Yeah. So yeah, there you go.
Brilliant.
Train your family, train your friends.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So, obviously, Jill, you've shared with us a little bit around the significance that sport or, being active has played in your life and continues to play, right? So, I guess what I'd like to know from you is what does sport and specifically boxing mean to you?
I guess for every sport, but for boxing right now, sport's always been about two things for me. There's the kind of obvious like fitness aspect, and there's the kind of less obvious aspect of community.
Mm,
Um, so yeah, fitness, I mean, quite obvious, particularly for boxing. It's a very like physically demanding sport. But if you put in the work, uh, you'll reap the rewards. Like I've never felt as good in my body. I've never looked as good as during the prep for the fight I'm having in a couple of weeks. On the kind of community side, yeah, sports always been about friends. Like when I was a kid, I did table tennis because my friends were there. I did rugby because my friends were there. I started doing karate because same, my friends were doing it. And when actually like community in sport is so important to me that when I came out, uh, like in my penultimate year of uni, um, I came out everywhere but my boxing gym because I like the women's classes too much. Like the people at the women's classes and the coach at the women's class too much to kind of lose that. Because if I came out, they'd be like, well, they might have been okay, you can stay, but it was always going to be kind of awkward. So I just didn't say anything.
Mm,
And now that I'm kind of settled in my transition, I'd say I'm boxing in the two gyms I'm boxing in regularly are two LGBT gyms. There's Knockout in Finsbury Park, and there's Bender Defenders in Bethnal Green. And I met, I think, probably almost all of my queer friends in London through sport and through boxing in particular.
mm,
And I mean, obviously not everyone is trans, but even the cis queer people there are, the best allies you could ask for.
mm,
Because I mean, there's the fact that currently the national governing body for boxing in England completely bans transgender athletes from taking part in amateur competitions. So amateur is the officially sanctioned competitions that lead you to the English titles, the Olympics and stuff. So they don't want me, but everyone else is trying to help me out, either challenging England boxing directly or finding me other avenues to fight,
mm,
um, fighting unlicensed shows. So yeah, England boxing might not want me to fight, but everyone
mm.
at the grassroots kind of level um, is in my corner.
Yeah, and that sense of community is, that you speak to, is that's a beautiful thing, and it's incredibly powerful and also empowering. So yeah, I love that. So that there's a nice segue into a conversation around representation, LGBTQ plus representation in sports, right? How has your access to representation, or probably the lack thereof, impacted your own journey as a sports person, as an athlete?
Um, I think there probably would have been times in my life, various points where I would have probably not carried on with the sport I was doing. I'm thinking about skateboarding, I'm thinking about boxing as well. Had I not had access to some level of representation. Because I said the first trans mask people I met were through skateboarding, but before that, a couple of years before that, well, like a year and a half before that, the first trans mask person I ever saw was this professional skater called Leo Baker, who had a video part out on Thrasher, so the biggest like skateboarding website called My Word, and I mean they weren't out as trans at the time, so I didn't know that they were trans, but they were like skating in a binder, had like a really short like buzz cut, and I was like, seeing this kind of androgynous looking person in skateboarding, kind of I guess gave me hope because I was like, oh, like there's people like me who are doing it. I might not know them. I will probably never meet them, but it's not, it's not. I'm not going to be alone forever doing my
Mhm,
thing,
mhm,
or among the boys on BMXs. So yeah, that did give me some level of hope, and obviously, kind of meeting them in like meeting trans mass people in person in Sibling, kind of sealed the deal for me to carry on skating for a number of years. Um, so yeah, if not for that level of representation, I would have probably stopped because the skateboarding community, it's just like boxing is kind of not very welcoming. It's kind of, this boys club. I kind of, they pride themselves on being like, oh, like we're doing this sport outside of the rules, like we're all outcasts, blah blah blah. But it's only a specific kind of outcast, right? If you're black, if you're a girl, if you're gay, like the first guy to come out as gay, the first professional, I think was 2016 or something. So
mhm,
it's like it's insane how much more backwards they are than they think they are. I mean, the skateboarding community, and it's even worse at the top of the game.
Sure.
And I guess that's kind of why also loads of queer people don't do sports or do less
Mhm.
sports. This the image of sport,
Yeah.
and obviously the very obvious like homophobia or transphobia that you might experience, the fear of that, and but yeah, also just thinking it's not for them because they don't see themselves
Mm.
in there.
Mm. Yeah. It's that not seeing themselves, right? That's pivotal to all of that, in that sense that those spaces aren't safe, um, for one. I just wanted to highlight a comment that Natalie Adams has popped into the chat there for you, Jill. Natalie says, fellow boxer here, you are right about the community thing. Our gym is like a family. Good luck in your fight.
Oh, I love that. And yeah, my gyms plural are like family. Definitely my
Mm,
queer chosen family.
mm.
Thank you. I'm hoping I'm hoping I'll get that win.
We're all going to be rooting for you, don't worry. So, staying on the topic of representation, right? Over the course of recent years, there has been a growing number of LGBTQ plus voices coming out in traditionally hyper masculine sports such as boxing, football, rugby. And, these people are using their platforms to speak up and advocate. And I guess I'm thinking here of, for example, Nicola Adams, a black lesbian who won gold at the 2012 London Olympics. And she also became the first ever Olympic gold medalist in women's boxing. There's Blackpool FC player Jake Daniels, who became the first professional player in British men's football to come out publicly, well, since Justin Fashanu in 1990. And there's Gareth Thomas, one of Wales' greatest rugby stars, perhaps arguably for some people, but the game's first professional player to come out as gay. And, he's considered to be an LGBTQ plus pioneer, a sporting giant, and an HIV advocate. But my question to you is, Jill, do you believe that, this kind of visibility of role models such as Gareth, Jake, and Nicola, is it enough to enable the much needed change?
um, yeah, I mean, I'm gonna say no. And don't get me wrong, like these people are amazing and the work they're doing is great and we absolutely need it. It's just yeah, it's just not enough because often the grassroots of a sport, like at your club level, will be supportive of your identity mostly. Probably not all the time, but a lot of it will be. But if the kind of head, like the national governing body, like international governing bodies, uh, are not, then you're not going to get anywhere. Like what good does it do a young trans boy to see Patricio Manuel? So if you don't know Patricio, he's a trans. He's the only trans professional boxer. He's a trans guy, absolutely killing it. So what good does it do a young trans boy to see Patricio doing his thing out there and killing it if, well, it turns out that he's not allowed to fight at all. Um, it's just like no matter how these amazing people are doing, if there is no support for you know the grassroots, the very base of the sport, then um, nothing's going to change.
Mm,
Um, like representation is one part of the equation. The supportive policies are what enable that yeah, that representation and that change.
mm. So I think it's fair to say, because you've stated it yourself, that there really is a lack of trans male visibility specifically, right? Not just LGBTQ plus as an umbrella term, but I'd like to kind of know, or would like you to share your thoughts around this lack of trans male visibility specifically, and how do we change that?
Yeah, I guess I mean this visibility problem is not just in sports, right? For trans guys, it's not just a sporting word problem. Because on the one hand, you get trans women who suffer from hypervisibility and
Mm,
overexposure, and then on the kind of other side of the coin, you get trans men who suffer from invisibility in different ways. Um, and at the root of it, for me, it's just a good old combination of transphobia and misogyny. Because if you truly believe that trans men are actually women and trans women are actually men, and you also believe that women are just not as good in general, they just can't compete. Well, it's very easy to understand the kind of argument that you hear about uh, trans women are going to dominate women's sport, or trans men are going to, who cares actually? Uh, and that's actually the thing that pisses me off the most, because every time you
mm,
mention, well, there's not just trans women in women's sport, there's also trans men who can't do men's sport, like me in boxing. People are like, well, it's irrelevant because trans men are not a threat. You're never going to win against cis men. You're never going to get to the elite level of a sport. And that pisses me off, because there are many trans male athletes out there at the elite level of their sport competing against cis men. You just never hear about them because it just doesn't serve anyone's transphobic agenda.
yeah,
Just a few names for everyone to look up if you want to be amazed. Chris Mosier in track and field, Mac Beggs in wrestling, or mentioned Patricia Manuel in boxing, Skylar Byler and Isaac Henning in swimming. Because you've probably heard like about the trans women in women's D1 swimming in the USA, but you haven't heard that there's actually two trans men who did it before and did it actually way better than she did.
mm, mm,
It's yeah, that just kind of pisses me off. And just because it is a combination of transphobia and misogyny, I guess it's just a matter of, getting to a more equitable society in general. Like
yeah,
once if we keep working towards that, there'll be a point where, yeah, trans male athletes are giving the credit they deserve, and trans female athletes as well, because their accomplishments are diminished because people are like, oh well, of course you're winning because you're actually a man. It's
mm,
like they can't win, they can't lose,
mm,
they will lose anyway.
yeah.
So
And I think that's such a vital point that you bring up, that transphobic agenda. We, and when I say we, the majority of the general public, right? We don't here see um, trans athletes doing all the incredible stuff out there because it's something that, you know, if you, if the mass media, etc., shine a light, illuminate these individuals, right, as incredible humans as they are, right? It just kind of perhaps it feeds into that fear, right? The fear that actually this will, you know, the transgender communities out there across the globe are going to become, I don't want to use the word normalized, but usualized, right? And
mhm.
just an accepted everyday expression and form part of the rich tapestry that makes up humanity, right?
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, there's a vested interest in
yeah,
keeping trans people and non-binary people othered, because it's a lot
mm,
easier to hate on people you don't see as people, actually, that you see as this, oh, this letter, this
yeah,
weird societal thing, and not,
mm,
as actual people having full lives. So yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So I guess then, we started touching upon what change needs to happen, the role representation, along with all the other um, tools that we need to kind of leverage to make the change. I guess a question on a lot of people's minds joining us here today as well, actually, how can they step up as allies? How do they connect, today's conversation to action? So how can allies meaningfully show up for our transgender siblings when it comes to making sport more inclusive?
Yeah, like that kind of depends. if we're talking about people who have deciding powers, either within, their club or their organization, or if, it's just like fellow athletes, coaches, you know, at the deciding level, there's the absolute like number one need is having inclusive policies in place. It's not just enough, to say that you're welcoming or whatever. You need the policy,
Mm,
not just on the competition side, but how are you handling harassment and bullying and whatever in your club when it's LGBT related. Coming up with policies that takes a lot of research, that takes a lot of time, and that takes actually talking to the athletes in your sport. Because I can guarantee that there will be trans athletes in your sport, even if you don't know them. If you put a call out, there people will come out and want to help, because we're never gonna um be offended by genuine offers of, oh, we're not actually quite sure how to do that, like help us.
mm,
um there's making sure that your club, whatever you're training, has inclusive facilities. So we're talking changing rooms, toilets. Often you'll have male, female, maybe sometimes a disabled toilet, but it's like, if you've got the space, gender neutral changing room. If you don't have the space, just have a gender neutral toilet that is not the disabled toilet. Because when you're trans and you, like, the only kind of place you can go to is the disabled toilet, you don't necessarily want to take up that space.
mm,
And I'm going to tell you, as someone who, I mean, identify as non-binary for a little bit, like, it's either you make the choice to, like, between the changing room that you want to go to, or you just don't come because you're
mm,
not comfortable. um, Making sure your kit is inclusive. If you absolutely have to have gendered kit, most of the time I'd wager you don't. But if you do, just making sure that people can choose whichever version of the kit they feel more comfortable with. Making sure that you use inclusive language as well. The coach of at one of my LGBT gyms, bless him, he's a he's a straight guy. He's been with the club for a little while, and it was like pointing out to him that he always said, guys, like, when making us do things, like, oh, guys, do that, guys, whatever. And so he started using my people instead, and every time he'd mess up, he'd do like 10 press ups or whatever, and
mm,
it's kind of, it's these little things to kind of make sure that everyone, you're not just saying you're welcoming, but you are actually, like, through your actions, through your words, you
mm,
are welcoming. I've got another coach that makes sure, so at the beginning of every session, everyone stands in a circle, everyone says their name and pronouns, and he makes sure to say, among other things, it's not just the only thing he says, but like, if you say among safety points, he says, oh, like, if you're training in a binder, so if you don't know, a binder is like a kind of compressive tank top that you wear to kind of hide your chest when you're transmasculine and you don't want your chest to show up too much. So if you're training in a binder, make sure to
mm,
take extra breaks. Like, we're not here to impress anyone. We're just here for ourselves.
mm.
Um, so it's little things like that. And
Yeah,
if you're just a fellow athlete, just easy. Respect our identity. Don't treat us differently from cis athletes. Hopefully, you should already not be treating female athletes and male athletes differently. If you do,
mm,
it's time to stop doing that as well.
yeah,
But also, yeah, just not treating us differently from cis athletes. And yeah, when in doubt, ask. We're, like I said, we're never going to be offended by genuine, offers
yeah.
of help.
Yeah, that respectful curiosity is so welcome, isn't it? Because it does start opening up those conversations, and a lot of people, we touch upon this all the time, are afraid of offending or creating disharmony. And actually, we're very good as humans in sensing whether someone has, malicious intent or not. But majority of people are just genuinely curious. They may not just have the language, for example, to ask their question and have that conversation with you. Um, do you find that most of the clubs that you've been training with or associated with, do you find that many of them are starting to build those, trans inclusive policies, or an LGBTQ plus inclusive policy, um, or is that something that's kind of only coming now onto their agenda,
I'm
their
gonna
radar?
say that I haven't trained in a mainstream gym pretty much since I stopped going to the women's classes in my previous gym, so pretty much since I moved to London, because when I moved, about a year and a bit after I came out, I just didn't want to deal with the hassle of trying to be stealth and whatever. So stealth, if you don't know, is like when you don't disclose that you're transgender, you just let everyone assume that you're cisgender of the gender you're passing as. Um, so mainstream gyms I haven't been in loads. I have been in a few, and I'm gonna say that no, they're not really where they need to be. But also in boxing in particular, you'll find that a lot of gyms are actually already not very good at accepting women. For instance, just like the basic of that, you said Nicola Adam was the first woman to medal in boxing at the Olympics, because yeah, that took until 2012 to allow women's boxing at the Olympics, and it took until I think 1999 or something to get women allowed to fight amateur competitions in the first place. So no, loads of gyms on there. I was pleasantly surprised when I went. So I recently got trained up as an assistant coach officially through England Boxing. So I'm a certified level 1 coach. And it's 2 weekends that you spend with the same group of like 20-ish people. And I showed up with another person from my LGBT gym, because our gym is paying for it to help out deliver more classes. And initially, like, we had this little conversation with them, being like, oh, like, are we going to tell them that we are here from a gay gym? Because they're going to ask everyone to, you know, like, say a few words about themselves, their gym. And the other person that was with me, it was like, yeah, let's just, fuck it, let's just say it. And if they're going to be awful about it, then at least we'll know. And so we did. We were like, oh yeah, we're from Knockout, this LGBT gym in London, blah blah blah, and everyone was kind of curious in a good way, and it sparked a conversation about the things that their gyms were doing for their local community. So people were like, oh yeah, I'm working a lot with like like a disenfranchised kid in my community. Like I'm working a lot with this particular subgroup, blah blah blah. Like we set up this gym for this reason. So they were like, oh yeah, it's great that you've got this thing for your community. Like I'm doing this for my community, and it kind of tied into all these different things that people were doing. So they might not be, right now, like the policy, all of that might not be in place.
Yeah.
But I think I was, yeah, pleasantly surprised with how the grassroots, they are supportive, and they find it kind of cool actually that there's LGBT gyms in London.
Mhm. Brilliant. And on that note, James Buckles just posted in the chat to say, great to hear your story, Jill. We're seeing some similar issues in cricket, and we're working closely with local cricket clubs, counties, and the England Cricket Board to try and change the culture and educate players at the grassroots level.
Well, that's amazing, James. I'm happy for cricket. It's really cool. Um, I'm friends with a trans male cricket player from India who still lives in India, and he was telling me that, well, back home it was a bit of a hustle,
Mm,
and he kind of like he was getting into, like, I don't know how to. I'm very completely. I knew nothing about cricket, but he was getting to the level in women's cricket that, like, he was getting, national team kind of level, and he kind of had to stop because he just, like, he wouldn't get accepted into the men's team. So I'm glad that there's things happening in
mm,
cricket as well, at least in England, and maybe I'll radiate through as well.
mm.
Um,
And I think this speaks to your point. We were having the conversation the other day, weren't we, Jill, where there is this misperception that LGBTQ plus athletes or sports people are islands in and of themselves. But actually, there's, flourishing communities that are connecting and networking and doing the work out there.
yeah, obviously when you come out and you don't know about any trans athletes, like, I was like everyone else. I was like, never heard about any trans male athletes. Is that even a thing? Are we allowed? Like, are there rules?
Mm,
Um, but once you start looking into it, you find all these communities online, but not just. There's loads. Well, these athletes that I named, like Chris Mosier, Skylar Byler, they facilitate groups of trans athletes online to kind of network, exchange tips.
Mm,
So my kind of connection started from that, but I found that actually, like in London, there's many of us. I joined these LGBT gyms because I wanted a space where, you know, I could be comfortable and I could be open about being trans, but also because I wanted to meet other trans boxers, in particular trans male boxers. And I did. there's some of us. I'm not gonna say there's a huge community, and there's not a million other trans guys who are trying to compete, Loads of us are doing that for fitness, community, not necessarily for the competition, and
mm,
that's fine. But yeah, I met plenty of other trans athletes. I'm weightlifting every week in a group of just trans male weightlifters in London. Like, how specific is that? And that's a
mm,
community that is flourishing. Like, the tickets sell out all the time, and there's always like
mm,
20, 25 of us every session. So yeah, we're not isolated,
mm,
uh and but we're also not like a scary mass of like trying to overtake cis people's sport.
right.
There's not a critical mass, but there's
Mm.
some of us, and generally we know each other because we seek out each other.
Yeah, yeah, love that. On that point, Rob Wilson's just popped into the chat that Yorkshire Cricket has just launched an LGBTQ plus supporters group. So, it's wonderful to hear that there are these communities, there are these support groups, etc., etc., out there. Um, I'm just conscious of time, Jill, and I guess uh, the age-old saying we could spend, the rest of the day chatting, but I guess I wanted to start bringing us closer to an end and do a little bit of reflection. So, my question to you is, what would you say to your younger self, knowing now what you know and living your truth?
I would tell him, you're trans. You're gonna look like you always wanted, and it's gonna happen a lot sooner if you figure it out now,
Yeah.
and you tell everyone. Um, so I just tell him that.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And finally, we always enjoy asking our storytellers or our speakers at these events what challenge, reflection, or even question would you like to leave our listeners with before we close out our session today?
All right. So I've got a little statistic for you. About 2% of the world's population has red hair. Obviously, that depends kind of by country. It's a bit higher here in the UK. So I'm gonna give you okay 10 seconds to think about one person who you know in real life. So friend, family, colleague, co-worker, whatever. Not an actor who has red hair. So yeah, starting now. All right. It's been about 10 seconds. I'm fairly certain everyone's come up with someone.
Yeah.
Now I have. Now I'm gonna give you another statistic. Depending on the study, about 2% of the world's population is trans. So I'm also gonna give you 10 seconds to think of one person who you know in person who is trans. All right. So I'm gonna wager that for some of you that might have been a bit more of a challenge, and it might be because you genuinely do not know anyone who is trans, though statistically that's kind of unlikely. Um,
Mm,
but is it because you know one, but they just haven't told you?
mm.
So I'm gonna leave you on that.
So incredibly powerful. Thank you. Jill, for sharing your story with us and telling us more about, you know, the work that you're doing and the change that needs to happen. So please, I encourage all of our audience members who want to find out how they can support Jill and his upcoming fight too. Please do feel free to connect with him on social media. And Jill, thank you so much for being here today. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It was a lovely conversation. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So I just want to say a very special thank you obviously goes to our sponsor, Jacobs, who we're incredibly proud to be collaborating with to bring you the storytelling series during Pride Month. And finally, thank you to all of you for joining us. This isn't our last storytelling session of the month, so please make sure you don't miss out on our conversation with Reverend Jade Macaulay, who will be sharing with us his mission as a Black gay man living with HIV to break the silence and end HIV stigma. So we'll be in conversation with Reverend Jade Macaulay on Wednesday, 28th of June. You can register by visiting our website, equalityleaders.com. We look forward to seeing you then. Until next time, bye for now.